Well, French President Emmanuel Macron is facing criticism for his recent comments defending the presence of French troops in Africa. France is in the process of withdrawing troops from Chad and several other countries. Macron sparked a backlash from several African leaders, accusing them of failing to say thank you to French troops battling Islamist insurgencies.
We had a secure relationship. In truth, it was in two parts. One part was our commitment to fighting terrorism since 2013. We were right. I think some have forgotten to say thank you, but that's okay. It'll come in time. I'm in a good position to know that ingratitude is a disease that cannot be transmitted to humans. But I say this for all the African governments who've not had the courage in the face of public opinion to bear it, that none of them would be in a sovereign country today if the French army had not been deployed in this region.
So, France is in the process of withdrawing troops from Chad, Senegal and Ivory Coast and has recently left Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso. Here's a closer look at how France is grappling with waning influence in the region.
More than 60 years after Chad gained independence from France, French troops are finally packing up to leave for good, as a growing number of African nations force their former coloniser to withdraw its military. Last month, Ivory Coast joined Chad and Senegal in cutting military ties following announcements from Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. The move, dubbed Frexit, comes amid growing local resentment towards France. French troops stayed on in West Africa after it ended its colonial rule in the 60s. And French soldiers have been fighting alongside local forces for decades. But critics say they've had little effect in deterring security threats and militant groups in recent years. Military coups in Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger have also sped up the withdrawal of French forces. Troop numbers are estimated to have dropped by around 70% since 2021. France still maintains a large military base in Djibouti, East Africa, where President Emmanuel Macron visited last month. But its exit elsewhere has seen countries look for other international support, with Russian mercenaries now operating in the region. French forces are likely to be almost entirely out of West Africa by the end of the year, signalling a significant shift in its influence over its former colonies.
French President Macron is getting a lot of pushback for his statement, suggesting a lack of gratitude for France's military involvement in Africa. Chad's top diplomat says Macron has to learn to respect Africans. So does he have a point there? I asked Beverly Ochieng, security analyst in Dakar.
I mean, yes, there have been very strong reactions, and even from Senegal, where the Prime Minister said that there were no talks with France, and he also evoked the memory of West African forces who did fight with France during the World War. So it does feel that they are returning Macron's comments back at him, that African forces also did make significant sacrifices during the World War, and France was merely giving similar support to the African countries that had called on it to come in. Some of the things that Macron has been saying over the years are partly what have fueled anti-French commentators, for instance. They've used comments such as that to reinforce ideas that France continues to have what is seen as a paternalistic attitude towards Africans and African leaders who have made some sovereign choices, as we have seen in statements by Côte d'Ivoire recently, Chad, Senegal, and even the Sahel, despite the acrimony behind it.
Now, French soldiers have been deployed to help fight against jihadists in the Sahel region. How do you see their withdrawal impacting security in the region?
Well, at the moment, with deployed across the region, these have not been adequately replaced, and the level of training and intelligence support that they were giving has also significantly reduced. The three countries have embarked on their own separate campaigns to recruit into their security forces. They're also forming what is called the Alliance of Sahel States to partly combat the insurgency, but violence has continued to spread. A few anecdotes that just reflect this is in the last year, there's been a resurgence of attacks in Benin and Togo. These are countries that years before did not experience militant insurgencies, and these are near the border with Niger and Burkina Faso. Last September, Mali's capital, Bamako, came under attack, and this was after a progressive 2-year period where Al-Qaeda militants have been moving towards the south. So the Sahel armies are quite stretched, and the withdrawal of French forces was quite sudden and acrimonious, which meant that there wasn't a clear handover of services, intelligence, or training and support.
Okay, in some countries in Africa, though, where France had a military presence, these countries still maintain relations with Paris. It was less acrimonious, the departure of French troops. We're talking Ivory Coast, Senegal, Chad, for example. How does the departure of French troops fit into their geopolitical calculations?
I mean, for Senegal, it's been very clear they are promoting nationalist policies. Faye, the president, said in November last year that the presence of French forces does not sit well alongside sovereignty and nationalism. With Côte d'Ivoire, it's a bit more, the implications are much more. They're having an election this year. Alassane Ouattara has, in many instances, been seen as being too close to France. Him making that announcement asserts that Côte d'Ivoire is in a good position to take over its security, despite the fact that there has been an insurgency in the Sahel. It's a vote of confidence. Relations will probably continue to be quite warm, particularly with Côte d'Ivoire and France, commercial, security, and even diplomatic. With Senegal, there might be some tensions, given the statements that came from both Sonko and Faye. With Chad, less so, because we have seen the statement from the foreign minister was quite stern, and the incremental statements from the government have shown that there might be some strained relations, which might lead to some challenges, especially for French commercial operators who are looking to stay or operate in Chad.
Now, some countries in the West, some in the United States, Europe, have concerns that other international players like China or Russia particularly could end up filling the gaps left by France's withdrawal. What do you make of that?
I mean, as it stands, various countries in the region are already building new partnerships. Senegal's President Faye said that he will be working across East, West, China, Turkey, Russia. Chad is establishing very strong ties with the United Arab Emirates, Russia. Hungary will be sending forces to the region. Côte d'Ivoire is also hoping for support from the US. So there will be a diversification. Russia will take advantage, definitely, not just in security, but even commercially. But we'll see a broad range of partners emerging in the region over the coming years.
Beverly, thank you very much for taking time to talk with us today. That was Beverly Ochieng, a security analyst in Dhaka.
Wilén is director of the Africa program at the Egmont Royal Institute for International Relations, and she joins us from Brussels. Welcome to DW. What do you think? Should African countries be thanking France for its military assistance?
No, I think that this was another one of those comments from Macron that was said perhaps with his advisors tearing their hair behind the screens. Macron has this habit of throwing out comments that will have consequences that are perhaps not thought through at the moment when he says them. There is one thing to think that in private, and there is another thing to say it in public. And of course, even if this was supposed to be an event for French ambassadors, there was media there. So there's for certain he knew that this is going to get out beyond French circles. So I think this was a strategic error on his part.
And you regard it as an error?
It's difficult with Macron to know what is an error and what is actually something that he says on purpose. We've known that he has, and with regards to Africa, this has happened quite a few times, that he has uttered a comment that has had quite big consequences for the French African relations. Of course, Africa is a continent, but with the country that he has had the comments for. And we know that during visits to Africa, he has also given comments that have not been appreciated by the African leaders, sometimes joking when it wasn't really appropriate to do so. And it's hard to know whether these are thought through comments or whether it's something that he just has to that he wants to get out there because he feels that it's the correct thing to do. But for sure, there is quite a few French officials and military officers who are working hard to shed the image that France has in Africa as an arrogant former colonial power. And comments like this by Macron is really undermining their efforts in doing.
The French military forces went into the Sahel to try and help stabilize the region by fighting Islamist insurgents. Why is it felt by those countries in the region that those French troops are no longer necessary?
Well, I think we have to remember that France has been ousted by the Sahelian states after military coups that started. This newest coup wave started in 2020 in Mali, and then it has continued with another coup in Mali in 2021, and we had 2 coups in Burkina Faso in 2022, and then one in Niger in 2023, and we had, of course, the constitutional coup in Chad in 2021. And it's only after the coup leaders have taken power that France has been ousted. So whether these decisions by the coup leaders to oust the French military forces have been taken because they didn't think they needed them, or because they thought that there would be a better strategic decision for them to stay in power by relying on other external actors like Russia, for example, that's a question that I think is up for debate.
Right. So as the French troops withdraw, who keeps the peace? I'm going to presume that the Islamist insurgency is not over.
Well, if we look at the Sahel countries, it's definitely not over. We've seen that ISIS Sahel, the ISIS Sahel, which was the main enemy, let's say, or the main target of Operation Barkhane, the French counterterrorism operation that was deployed to the region since 2014. It doubled its territorial control in the year after Barkhane left. So between 2022 and 2023, it doubled its territorial control in Mali. In Niger and in Burkina Faso, we've also seen that there has been quite an exponential increase of jihadist control, especially in Burkina Faso, where France only had a small special forces operation, Opération Sabre, that was also, of course, ejected when the military collaboration with Burkina Faso ended in January in 2023. So it's hard to make the correlation between Burkina Faso ousting French troops and the increase in jihadist groups, but for sure that it's not going well in the region right now. Burkina Faso has about 60% of its territory that the military is not controlling. We have JNIM, which is the largest Al-Qaeda affiliated jihadist group in the region that is present in 11 out of 13 communities in Burkina Faso. So the situation is not looking great at the moment.
And so you mentioned that Russia being one of the players to try and fill that gap. If the situation there is deteriorating, do we presume that the Russian forces are there to keep these military dictatorships in power rather than secure the region against the insurgents?
It's difficult to say. For sure that there is, Russia has this deal that they are offering a lot of African authoritarian leaders of regime maintenance, which is, of course, very attractive for these leaders, especially if they see that their positions are fragile, which is the case in many of these states that have jihadist insurgencies. For example, right now, what we've seen is that in Mali, the former Wagner troops, we call them still Wagner troops in Mali because they have not been recognized by the Malian authorities to be in place. So they're not the official Russian troops. They suffered a major setback this summer in Tensawatan, a city in the north of Mali, where we know that over 70 Wagner troops were killed by Tuareg separatists, so Malian rebels, let's say, and jihadist groups. And that's the first major setback that we've seen of the Russian forces in this region of Africa. And we also know that there have been two major attacks by JNIM, so by the major jihadist organization in Mali, in Bamako in September in 2024, which is the first attacks in Bamako since 2015. So clearly Russian troops are not able to secure the country from these attacks.
It's a fascinating analysis, and we thank you for it. Nina Wilén from the Egmont Royal Institute for International Relations. Thank you.
Thank you.